You know, there are places on Earth we think we know. Ancient lands, fallen empires, their names echoing through history. But then, there's India. A name that brings up 1,000 images, right? But the reality is, well, it's surprisingly new. The modern Republic of India isn't some ancient monolith. It's actually a young, volatile nation, born just decades ago in an explosion of violence. And it wasn't built on some single grand idea. No, it was built on the deep and frankly unresolved arguments of its founders. Think about it. An improbable democracy, a chaotic economy, a deeply spiritual society that's somehow rocketing towards a secular future. It is, from its very core, a republic of contradictions. So let's dive into the story of this nation, a country that's constantly and fascinatingly at odds with itself.
So where does the story of modern India begin? Not with a celebration. It begins with blood. This number, 2 million? It's just an estimate. The real number we'll probably never know. It was just lost in the chaos. But that's the human cost of carving one nation into two. 2 million people, men, women, children, just swallowed by violence in the summer of 1947. And this wasn't a war fought by armies. It was neighbor turning on neighbor. It was a complete, visceral tearing apart of a social fabric that had held for centuries. This is the trauma at its foundation. It's the ghost that still haunts the Republic, and it's the immense tragedy that everything we know about modern India had to grow from.
And if you want to understand how this catastrophe happened, you just have to look at the timeline. It's all in the dates. So, August 15th, 1947. India is finally free. A decades-long struggle is over. People are celebrating in the streets of Delhi, Lahore, Calcutta, but here's the crazy part. They didn't know where the new border was. They literally didn't know which country they were now in. That border, the Radcliffe Line, which was, by the way, scribbled together by a British lawyer who'd never even been to India, wasn't published until 2 days after independence. Think about that. That delay, that vacuum of power, it just created a firestorm of fear. And in that void, rumors flew, militias armed up, and 20 million people began the largest mass migration in human history, all across a landscape of pure horror.
And this is where we get to the central paradox, the absolute miracle of the Indian experiment. How on earth does a nation born from religious division, whose first breaths were choked with sectarian violence, how does it then turn around and declare itself a secular, pluralistic democracy? I mean, how does it give every single citizen the right to vote, no matter their religion, their caste, their gender, at a time when, let's be honest, a lot of Western countries were still figuring that out? This isn't just some historical question. It's the core tension, the central conflict that has defined every single part of India's story from day one right up to today.
Well, the answer is that India's identity wasn't some pre-packaged thing. It wasn't inherited from ancient kings or handed down by the British. It had to be hammered out, forged in fire. Picture this. The smoke from Partition is still in the air, and you have some of the most brilliant, passionate people of the 20th century in a room, clashing, debating, and finally compromising to build the very soul of this new nation. And here's the key. Every one of them had a totally different vision, a different answer to the big question. What is India supposed to be?
The great poet Rabindranath Tagore, he saw this coming years before independence, and his words here, a miracle of freedom upon the quicksand of social slavery, that just perfectly captures the biggest fear of India's founders. See, they knew that getting rid of the British, that was just round one, maybe even the easy part. The real fight, the true challenge, was internal. How can you call your nation free when millions of your own people are trapped in the brutal, dehumanizing prison of the caste system? That social slavery, as Tagore put it, that was the quicksand. It was the thing that could swallow the entire dream of this new republic before it even learned to walk.
So the identity that India ended up with, it wasn't one single voice. It was more like a choir, with a lot of different, often competing voices. First, you had B.R. Ambedkar. Now here's a man born into the so-called untouchable caste who becomes the main architect of the Constitution. For him, political freedom was pointless without social freedom. His number one goal, the complete annihilation of caste. Then, in a totally different corner, you have Mahatma Gandhi. He's dreaming of an India of small, self-sufficient villages built on spiritual truth. He was really skeptical of a big, modern, powerful central government. And you can't forget Rabindranath Tagore, kind of the nation's conscience. He was constantly warning everyone about the dangers of aggressive nationalism, arguing that humanity had to come before patriotism. And finally, the man who actually got to steer the ship, India's first Prime Minister, Jawaharlal Nehru. He was a total modernist. He believed in science, in reason, and he thought India's future lay in building huge dams and factories. He called them the new temples of modern India. The Indian constitution we have today is basically the result of the massive compromises between these giants. It's a document that's both deeply liberal and fiercely interventionist, both secular and protective of religion. These arguments, they were never really settled. They were just woven right into the fabric of the country, and they're still being fought over today.
So for the first 40 years or so, it was really Nehru's vision that won out. India was on this state-led path. But then came 1991, and a crisis so big it forced a massive, dramatic change of course. This change would unleash a whole new economic engine, an engine that would completely change India's role on the world stage. But, and this is a big but, it would also create a brand new set of absolutely mind-boggling and frankly dangerous paradoxes.
So, before 1991, the Indian economy was basically in a straitjacket. They called it the license Raj. It was this insane maze of permits and rules controlling everything. The government told you what you could make, how much of it you could make, everything. The idea was to be self-sufficient, but the reality? Total stagnation. It was inefficient, corrupt, and the growth was so slow people mockingly called it the Hindu rate of growth. By 1991, the whole system just collapsed. The country was basically bankrupt. We're talking just a few weeks of foreign currency left. India actually had to fly its gold to London just to get an emergency loan. It was a huge moment of national humiliation, and it forced them to completely rethink everything. The government ripped up the license Raj and finally opened the doors to private companies and foreign money. And the results? Whoa, they were dramatic. Just look at this number, $81 billion. That's the foreign investment India got in just one recent year. Before 1991, that number was basically zero. This isn't just a statistic, it represents a seismic shift. This money fueled brand new industries like software. It turned quiet towns into buzzing tech hubs, and it created this huge new middle class with dreams and aspirations. Suddenly, India wasn't just seen as a poor country anymore. It was an emerging global power, a poster child for capitalist success.
But every success story has a dark side, right? The same reforms that killed the old license Raj accidentally created a new monster, what people now call the billionaire Raj. You see, as the government stepped back, this new power couple emerged. Politicians and a small group of super-connected billionaires. This new system of crony capitalism meant that all the benefits of this amazing growth got sucked up to the very, very top. It created this new class of oligarchs with just a staggering amount of money and political influence.
And the scale of this wealth concentration, it's just mind-blowing. The top 1%, now owns over 40% of all the wealth in the country. That's more than the entire middle class combined. Let's flip that. The bottom half of the population, we're talking over 700 million people. They get to share just 3% of the nation's wealth. And that right there is the great paradox of India's growth. It's a country that's pulled millions out of deep poverty, but at the same time, it's become one of the most unequal places on the planet. You can see it everywhere. The gleaming skyscrapers right next to sprawling slums. It's a daily, brutal reminder of a country split into two completely different worlds.
But this new economic engine has a huge critical flaw. For all its power, it just isn't creating enough jobs. It's a problem people call jobless growth. What that means is the big GDP number keeps going up, but it's not turning into good, steady jobs for the millions and millions of young people who need them. And this crisis, it hits young people the hardest. They're about a quarter of the population, but they make up a shocking 83% of all the unemployed people in the country. So yeah, for every one success story you hear about in a Bangalore tech park, there are so many others with a college degree and absolutely no job prospects. And all that hope and aspiration, it's turning into a really dangerous mix of frustration and anger.
Okay, so this brings us to today. This is where all those old contradictions from India's founding crash head-on with the dangerous paradoxes of its new economy. The entire future of the country, its stability, its promise, it all boils down to how it handles two massive, interconnected challenges. And these challenges are going to define India for the rest of the 21st century.
800 million. Let that number sink in. That's how many people in India are under the age of 35. It is the largest youth population the world has ever seen in one place. Ever. That's more people than the entire population of Europe. It's more than North and South America combined. This one fact, this single number, is the most important piece of the puzzle for India's future. It is, at the same time, the country's single greatest asset and its most terrifying existential threat.
So here's the dilemma. On the one hand, if India can educate this massive group of young people, give them skills, and this is the big one, give them jobs, you could unleash what's called a demographic dividend. Decades of insane growth and innovation. India becomes a true global superpower. But, on the other hand, if it fails, if all of that human energy has nowhere to go, it becomes a demographic disaster. Mass unemployment, social unrest, political chaos, the kind of thing that could tear the country apart. The future of the nation, and you could argue a big piece of the world's future, really hangs in the balance, right here.
And at the exact same time all this is happening, that old debate about India's soul, the one between Ambedkar, Gandhi, Tagore, and Nehru, it's back. And it's more intense than ever. You're seeing a bunch of new laws and social movements that are really challenging that original idea of a secular, pluralistic country. Things like the Citizenship Amendment Act, which brings religion into citizenship for the first time, or the big push for a universal civil code that would get rid of separate religious laws for marriage and divorce. This is a massive fight over what it even means to be Indian. Is India a pluralistic nation for people of all faiths like the Constitution originally planned? Or is it a nation that's defined mainly by its majority Hindu culture? This is a huge, fundamental reshaping of the country's identity.
So here we are, a nation of almost 1.5 billion people. This messy, vibrant democracy standing at a massive crossroads. Its entire future depends on solving the contradictions that have been there from the very beginning. Can it create an economy that actually works for those 800 million young people, not just for the billionaires? And can it figure out who it wants to be without ripping itself apart in the process? The decisions made in the next few years won't just decide the fate of 1/6 of all people on Earth. They'll also help answer one of the biggest questions of our time. Can a huge, diverse democracy like this actually make it in an age of growing nationalism and inequality? So the final question is, which path will this republic of contradictions choose?